Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is Tuesday. We're in the book of Jonah chapter 3, and it says, Then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. And that really kind of sets up the question that I want to ask. But he says, Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and deliver the message I have given you. This time Jonah obeyed the Lord's command and went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to see it all. This is the same command Jonah had previously gotten, so it's not anything new. God comes to him a second time. The question I want to ask today, and I think it's a complicated question, and I don't know that there is a good answer to it. I just would like to flesh it out a little bit. It's why do some people get second chances and others do not? So I can see in Scripture multiple times, I've heard some great sermons preached on God's a God of second chances. But I can think of some times that he didn't give second chances. Ananias and Sapphira happened to be one in the New Testament. I'm not sure Judas got a second chance. There are people that got multiple chances, but there are people who did not. And it is hard to explain to people why some do and some don't. Now, I think there are some explainable reasons why some do and some don't. But it's the ones that are not as explainable. Why do you think some people have second opportunities and others don't?
Well, I think in both of those cases, we have no idea what kind of work God had been trying to do in their lives that may have not been obvious to other people, but changes he had been asking them, pushing them to make,
Right.
For years that they were just, I guess, not listening to, being stubborn about. I don't know. I think outwardly it looks like there wasn't a second chance, but I also feel like we have no idea what was happening up to that event.
And with Judas, he had time afterwards. So I guess my question on that would be was he willing to take the opportunity for a second chance, or did he just continue to go in his own way, or was he so grief-stricken or shameful for what he did that he couldn't bring himself to that? We won't know. But with Ananias and Sapphira, I don't know. I think God was creating an example immediately at the beginning of the church to take away any kind of devious acts like that at the very. And I think any time that you start something, you have to be a little bit more strict at the beginning to make sure that people understand the seriousness of what your organization's for. This being the beginning of the church, that couldn't start with that kind of deviousness there. That's just me speculating.
Even in the world, do you see people who it doesn't appear get a second opportunity while other people have?
Appear, yeah. I'd lean back on what Sheryl was saying before. We never know what has led up to that. Maybe they've continually gone away from God multiple times, and we just see the one time that they kind of get hit with something. Because I don't think that I don't think that God enjoys condemning people or punishing people. I think that if it's a punishment that still leaves opportunity later on to repent, it's just basically a fatherly correction if you're willing. But at the end of the day, is the person willing to accept that and make the changes?
I mean, the only situation I can think of in which somebody would not be given a second chance is death.
Do you think the reason why some people don't get second chances is they just don't take advantage of it, or they don't want to deal with the headache of it?
I mean, if you didn't take the chance in the first place, it seems pretty probable that it was something that you didn't want to do, or you weren't willing to put in the work or take the risk. You felt like it was too much for you to deal with, or you were unable or not equipped.
Sometimes it's pride. We can be very prideful people that we don't want to make that change. We don't want to admit that we were wrong. We want to turn around and blame people or blame God on something, and that can turn into anger and resentment and stuff, because maybe something terrible did happen in your life. You know, you lost a spouse or a child to something that was completely unfair, and you've been living your life in a good way. Why does this happen to me? And it can cause a lot of like emotional disconnect where maybe you're just angry and you don't want to be associated with God at that point.
Speaking for God would be dangerous. You know, why some people have opportunities and others don't. I don't think we can see, you know, like Ananias and Sapphira, how many times, you know, what had been going on in the background. I think there are lots of ways we can explain it or justify it or say it didn't happen or should have happened, or maybe God had warned them ahead of time. I don't know. It just doesn't appear they had an opportunity. But I would say those instances are rare. That's kind of how I see them.
Mhm.
Whether God was dealing with them or not, whether it was a one-off, okay, I've made a mistake, you're done. And I mean, there are some situations in the Old Testament where, you know, one mistake, you're done, you know. Um, um, and then there were other situations where it seems like over and over again they were afforded opportunities. My experience is, let's take the sovereignty of God out of the equation for just a minute and say, okay, God's going to extend your life, because that's what happens. Judas and Ananias and Sapphira, they're dead. You know, outside of that, if you have breath to breathe, much of it is personal desire, grit, personality type. You know, Jay and I have had conversations before, and he has said to me, if the same thing happened to me that happened to you, I would go into a hole and nobody would ever see me again. Like I'd never just show my face in public. My personality is not made up that way, you know, um, and so I I take advantage of the opportunity, but I also have to take the junk that comes with it. You know, there is what's the book? Y'all are old enough. Y'all might have read this in school. Scarlet Letter. Did y'all read the Scarlet Letter? You know, in school. You know, once you've made a certain mistake, it is difficult. It takes a long period of time to overcome that. It's easier to go in a different direction. You know, it's easier to go be a car salesman or do construction work or whatever than it is to go back in that same path, because then you have to create so much credibility it becomes complicated. And as I heard Henry Cloud say recently, he said you have to create a new past, meaning you've got to go in a direction long enough that your old past is far enough behind you that now you have a past. People can go, okay, I can trust them again. And my experience is people don't want the headache that comes with a second chance. You know, there's a lot of headache that comes with a second chance. You know, if you get fired from a job, the book we're reading in the Awe of God, you know, he tells in the last couple of days as we're recording this, there's a story he tells about having to let go of an employee, and then 3 months later he brings them back. There's a lot of people who wouldn't go back because they don't want the stigma of having been let go. They don't want to have to deal with. You know, what are people going to think of me? Because we are consumed with what are people going to think. You know, and I think the more you're concerned about what people think, the less likely you are to take advantage of a second chance. You know, I think about ball players. There are some ball players who have had some horrible instances in their life, and they get to come back. There was a boy from Apex, right outside of Raleigh, Fuquay, somewhere around in there. Hamilton. Somebody help me with his first name. He was a killer ball player. I mean, incredible ball player. Out of high school. And I can't think of his first name. His last name was Hamilton. Anyway, he went in the minor leagues. He got a big contract, went in the minor leagues, got hooked on drugs, rehab multiple times. He'd get called up to the major leagues, and then he'd just relapse. Finally, he's like 30 by the time, he somewhat gets clean. And he has this career, but everywhere he goes, I mean, people are jeering him, making signs about, his past and, booing him. And, we see that at, I've seen it in college basketball where a kid gets arrested, they make all these signs making fun of him. And a lot of times the reason why people won't go back and take advantage of a second chance is because they don't want to deal with this stuff. Is that your experience? Or do you think there are other reasons why people don't take advantage of second chances?
I could see the headache in that and the apprehension to know the work that you have ahead of you to try to basically rebuild yourself. So I could see that being a problem that people would have, what would keep them from taking that second chance.
I think typically a second chance means that there's a change that you have to make in your life, which is going to be really hard, whether you're going to face outward consequences for it or not, like you're talking about.
Right.
How people see you, what they're going to think of you and treat you, how they're going to treat you. But, I mean, I would say that in my mind, that would be the number one reason that people wouldn't take a second chance, is because they're unwilling to make the changes that are going to have to happen in order for them to take advantage of that second chance.
Yeah, and sometimes the changes are, you have to go even further. So the way I see it, for me, is there are things that I don't believe I can do that other people can probably get away with because I don't have that variance anymore. And so I got to keep a tighter, I got to keep it closer than somebody else might. And some people don't like that. They want the freedom, they want it to be like nothing's ever happened. It's like your kids are the same way. They say, I'm sorry, and they've done something really stupid. And the next day they want freedom. And they're like, but that was yesterday. Yes, that's right. It was yesterday. Like it was just yesterday. Do you understand that? Yeah. And they don't understand that they haven't created enough distance for there to be trust built again. And I think sometimes with second chances, we don't realize we haven't created enough distance. We want it to be like it was, and it can't always be that way. Yeah. Any other comments about second chances?
I think they're good.
Yes, if you take advantage of it. That's right. If you take advantage of it.
Have the opportunity.
Yeah.
Won't be easy, but in my experience, it's always been worth it.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue the conversation in the book of Jonah.